Meeting together, call the meeting to order. The House Energy, Utilities, and Telecommunications Committee. Got several things we want to look at. Chairman Jeffries, I see you're here. We're not going to do anything with you right this minute, but if you can, I want to acknowledge that you're here and appreciate you being here. But we got some things we're going to go through, and hopefully we can go through these things fairly quickly. But I appreciate you being here. We're going to look at your bill here momentarily. Let's see, Representative Cantrell, would you ask God's blessings and guidance on this committee? Thank you. First thing we're going to take up, I'm going to move out and have Chairman Carson preside here while I present House Resolution 482. So I won't say anything else until you go right ahead, Chairman.
We just do this. You want to go up front? I'm kidding.
I hope I can get the chair back.
I think we can. Okay, members of the committee, we're looking at House Resolution 482. I'm working on LC 1150247. LC 1150247. Chairman Parsons. Actually, I'm going to use this one.
Okay, thank you, Chairman Carson. This is actually a resolution that was brought to us from Public Service Commissioner Bubba McDonald, and this is it's an encouragement resolution is what it is, but it has to do with nuclear waste. And I might say before I even go into this, nuclear waste, it's an important issue, obviously, but it was a very important issue to Chairman Harry Geisinger when he was here. And just as a note, it wasn't long after Chairman Geisinger passed away that I got something in the mail, and it was information. It was a booklet on nuclear waste, and the note on it said that Chairman Geisinger had asked for it. He'd requested the information, but that they'd learned that he had passed away, and they were passing it on to me. And I keep that booklet as one of many things that I remember Chairman Geisinger about. But this resolution is encouraging our Georgia congressional delegation to immediately help enact legislation with the sole purpose of reestablishing the nuclear waste program per the Nuclear Waste Policy Act. And currently, I asked Georgia Power just a while ago what's happening with the nuclear waste now, and the only thing they can do with it currently is to store it on site. And there was some action taken, I guess, a couple years ago regarding Yucca Mountain. And it's my understanding that they can't store any of the nuclear waste out there. This would to encourage the delegation to reestablish this. It was actually begun in 1982. There's a note and there's actually something in this resolution that the state of Georgia, taxpayers in the state of Georgia, have put over $1.6 billion into this program, and as of today's date, there's nothing to show for it, and that's really what it is. So I'd ask you to pass this, and we'll get it on through and encourage our congressional delegation. And here again, I'm doing this on behalf of Commissioner Bubba McDonald, who has a real interest and a lot of knowledge on this issue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Any questions from the committee? Coach Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have a very simple question. Maybe Georgia Power can answer it. You said that, Mr. Chairman Parson, that the waste is being stored on site. At what is the capacity before it need to be removed, and how many more years they can continue to do that?
Yeah, well, I mean, Coach, it's my understanding that that's the only thing that they can do with it right now. It's my understanding that there's two ways that they're storing it. I may be wrong about this, but at our nuclear site in Georgia, stored in water somehow and also stored in concrete. And it's my understanding that in the concrete anyway, it can be stored up to 100 years, I believe.
Okay.
I'm sure Representative Drenner knows a lot more about that than I do, but it's got to be a better, it's a place to, some place where it can be taken away from the site. Is what they intended back in 1982, and I think that's what needs to be done.
Well,
It seems to me that that's what needs to be done today.
Thank you. Any other questions? I wanted to appreciate you bringing this forward, Chairman Parsons. I also wanted to ask, when Plant Vogtle was envisioned and modeled and so forth, it was the expectation that the DOE would abide by the Nuclear Waste Act and take this waste to Yucca Mountain, but to date has not done that. Is that not correct?
I believe it's correct. I'm not, don't even claim to be an expert on this.
Okay.
I'm doing this on behalf of PSC Commissioner McDonald, but I think
I
that
understand.
is correct. Yeah.
All right. All right. No more questions or comments? Time for a motion? Do I hear a second? Okay. All in favor of the motion, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Carson. Appreciate that. We have more on the agenda. Probably it looks like there's more than there really is, but there are a couple of things. Is Representative Hawkins here? Yeah. Okay. You want to go ahead and talk about your bill? Now, this is the bill. We're not going to take any action on it, but it's going to be assigned to subcommittee. But I do want you to just tell us what the bill does.
I'll tell you what, if the chairman, okay with the chairman, I'll have Christopher Sinclair come up in case there's any technical questions.
Okay.
Okay. I mean, I'm going to run through this pretty quick because I know y'all have a pretty good agenda here today. This bill deals with cell companies that actually are in business right now, wholesale, and with this also retail, that provide cell service to wholesale. They wholesale it, in other words, to the Verizon, AT&Ts. What they're doing is they're putting antennas on poles, telephone poles. They're connecting these antennas with fiber optics. They're going into municipalities and into the county areas, and it's expanding cell service this way. Presently, most of their customers, most of their municipalities are charging them 3% on their income. DOT, though, calls for a $5,000 per mile municipality and $1,000 per mile in the county. This bill addresses that and really tries to unify the 3% concept, because that's really what they're being charged now by the vast majority of the municipalities, the 3%. If a county does not have retail or wholesale end users in that county, then when they cross that county with their fiber optic lines, they have to pay the $5,000 per mile and $1,000. Well, actually, if it's county, $1,000 per mile. Okay, so they have to pay DOT rates in municipalities and counties where they do not have end users. That's really what the bill speaks to. It tries to clarify the playing field right now for these companies, and I'll stand for any questions.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate that. If there are any questions, you'll be recognized. What I wanted to do was give Representative Hawkins a chance to explain the bill. I'm going to go ahead and assign it to Chairman Dollar's subcommittee. Obviously, it can't pass the House this year, but you can work with Chairman Dollar, and y'all can, and whatever would be his pleasure as far as the subcommittee, and we can pass anything out of here. So whether it goes on to the full House, that's another issue. Are there any questions? Yes.
Mr. Chairman, I know you want to move along, but just to the author of the bill, and maybe the gentleman's here, I think I understand the concept. I talked to a couple people about it. This is resale, so arguably this is sort of being taxed twice. So you're getting 3% on the revenue that comes through this, but it's then carrying a sell call that somebody else is paying a franchise fee on it. The first thing. Second
That's
thing is,
wholesaling.
I understand that, and Chairman Parsons is exactly right. Crossover day is long since gone.
Right.
But failing, if the legislature saw fit to take action, failing to do that this year, I mean, are there critical points where this is going to cost? Because at the end of the day, the companies aren't paying this; the ratepayer is,
Right.
somewhere down the road.
Absolutely
And so where I've been is not true that by putting these things up, you're probably having less 150-foot towers in residential
absolutely.
areas.
Sure.
So my question is, and again, I'm not getting in front of Chairman Parsons here, but is there a critical nature to the timing if Chairman Dollar and Chairman Parsons were able to vet it to find a agreeable place to put it on a piece of legislation?
I think there's consideration in a couple areas of this state right now that are really sort of holding on and holding off, hoping to do the $5,000 per mile rather than the 3%. That's a vast difference in what these companies are paying. And you're right,
Well,
the end user pays.
I was going to say again, not to correct the representative there, but it's basically these companies want them to charge this $5,000 a mile. Ultimately, the ratepayer, the citizens of those neighborhoods, are who going to ultimately pay it. Thank you.
Yes, sir. You're right. Thank you.
Okay, I think we have one more question. Yes, sir.
I think Chairman Martin kind of hit that. It's
Okay.
$5,000 per mile with the one calculation, but it would be, can I get that number again? I was told that about a week and a half.
3%.
But the 3% would work out on an average in total dollars.
Chris?
So good afternoon. My name is Christopher Sinclair with Crown Castle. In one actual example where we have a jurisdiction that is withholding our permits, and because the current statute is ambiguous as to how to address wholesale end users rather than retail end users, the difference is approximately $8,800 versus $135,000 per year in that one jurisdiction.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
And with that, that bill is assigned to Chairman Matt Dollar's subcommittee, and you can get with him. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming. Appreciate it. Representative Drenner, you have two propositions. If you would explain to the committee what those are, and here again, I'm going to have those assigned to Chairman Martin's subcommittee. But if you'll just explain to us what the bills do.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not asking for any movement on House Bill 528.
Okay.
HR 560 is a study committee that is based upon House Bill 528. And really what I'm asking the committee to consider is maybe you all don't know this, but 1 in 4 families have no non-retirement savings. 1 in 4 families. 4 out of 10 people have less than $750 in the bank. And 6 out of 10 people have less than $5,000. So the reason I brought this study committee was because I've been getting complaints from some of the seniors in my area that they get their checks late, and then they get a late fee for their utilities. So if they're one of those people that have no non-retirement savings, then they're in a quandary. So I'm asking the committee to consider looking at this issue with House Resolution 560 as a study committee over the summer to figure out if there's, I know that a lot of the utilities that are here today have preferred payment policies. I've spoken to many of them individually. I'm not sure that that's a universal occurrence across the state. So the intent of the study committee is just to look at how deep the issue is and how best that we can implement a preferred utility payment program that helps our seniors and our veterans.
Very good. I don't see any questions. Okay, we'll take just maybe one or two questions because we do need to move on. Coach, you have a question?
I do.
I'm sorry, I just turned you off again. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the lady, gentle lady from DeKalb County, I would love to be on the study committee. I'm on a fixed income myself, so I would vote. True. I would like to be on that committee. If you will ask the chairman, I will vote positive yes.
Are you trading favors here?
I don't know. We can do things after March the 30th.
Okay, thank you, Coach, and thank you, Representative Drenner. I know that I know what you're wanting to do is try to help people, and I do know that there's a lot done by the companies to help people that are in trouble. I've even talked to some people in local government whose these are their constituents who have actually paid bills for them and things of that nature to keep their power on. Did you have a question? Okay, go ahead.
I guess, we get the bills and we pay them, but I never really know who regulates that. But wouldn't it not be the Public Service Commission that would really have oversight of that, as opposed to us digging into the legislative weeds? Because if we had a study committee, we could come out with a recommendation, but are we going to actually write a bill telling Georgia Power or any utility company when they have to, what kind of payment terms they need to give their customers? So I'm trying to find the purpose of a study committee.
Well, I mean, it's a good question. I'm not advocating for or against her proposition. Of course, I don't think that she's probably talking about just utilities that are regulated. Is that correct? So, I mean, there's, we have utilities they're not regulated. But I mean, you ask a good question. I think that a good place for those will be when it gets to Chairman Martin's subcommittee. But I mean, did you have a further question? Okay. Yes.
I'd like to make a statement. Representative Drunner, our EMCs who are owner regulated have multiple payment options and things. I think
Okay.
they do an excellent job overall.
Thank you. I did want to give you the opportunity just to explain what you wanted to do, and but as far as the further questions and providing reasons to have the study committee and so on and so forth, I'll leave that with you and members of Chairman Martin's subcommittee. But thank you. It's looking after those who have less and more problems, and seniors and veterans who have financial problems. I think it's a worthy thing to consider and to look at. And like I say, I'm not advocating for or against your bill. I think that the place now would be in Chairman Martin's subcommittee. So with that, I believe we're up to the senator's bill. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So I will recognize Senator Jeffries, Chairman Jeffries of the Regulated Industries Committee. Is that correct? Regulated Industries Committee of the Senate with Senate Bill 191. And what we're doing today, Senator, is having a hearing on the bill with the full committee, so then that the subcommittee could look at it. But I want the whole committee to have a chance, and we've got a good turnout here today too. For this late. I want them to hear the issue and hear your presentation, and then it'll go into subcommittee. But then when it comes back, they will have had a chance to hear you and ask questions. So we're at that place. I forgot to mention, I think we have a sign-up sheet, right? Yes, sir. Forgot to mention. Okay, we're going to have a sign-up sheet down here if there's anybody who wants to offer some testimony on it. And let's see, Chairman, your mic is on, so
Okay.
Go right ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Make sure we're looking at there's been so many different versions of this.
And I do want to say this, in this committee, this full committee today, I just want to look at the original,
Okay.
the bill that passed, not maybe the original, but the bill that passed the Senate and came to us.
Okay, very well. Well, as you know, last year we issued a moratorium on petroleum pipelines, and a study commission was set up during the summer, which I co-chaired with Chairman Hitchens. And if we can get this bill out of committee, Representative Fleming has agreed to carry it. We've had a lot of input from Colonial Oil, Colonial Pipeline, EPD, GDOT. In the original bill, we had changed it from GDOT to move it over to GFA. But in the substitute, we're going to move it back to GDOT. That was referenced from the second floor. But this bill creates some new definitions in statute that make it clear on what type of work is performed when it comes to maintenance, expansion, extension, and new pipelines. It requires EPD to issue a permit for all new pipelines and extensions of existing pipelines. It will require a certificate of public convenience and necessity from GDOT for the use of eminent domain for new pipelines and extensions. It grants eminent domain rights to petroleum companies for maintenance and expansions within right-of-way and easements, and allows companies to rewrite pipelines up to within a mile in case there was houses involved when it comes to emergencies. It provides much greater flexibilities for companies to manage their existing and aging infrastructure and maintenance. It prohibits EPD permit issuance and GOT granting eminent domain in the 11 County Coastal Management Zone. The Coastal Management Zone is based on science and around the sensitivity of coastal geology and hydrogeology defined in statute already, and is consistent with public comments that we heard on all the meetings we had this summer. And that's kind of a quick version of it.
Now, as I recall, the moratorium on eminent domain is through June of this year that we
That's
have
correct.
in effect through that legislation was passed last year.
That's correct.
Is that correct?
So if we can't make something work, we will probably need to look at trying to extend that in some kind of way.
Extend the eminent domain. Now, is that
The moratorium of eminent
is
domain.
that in this legislation?
No.
There's nothing in the legislation that would extend eminent domain, extend the moratorium on eminent domain even for those counties that you
No.
mentioned? No? Okay.
You don't need eminent domain if you can't build one at all. Right?
That's right.
Well,
in those 11 counties.
I'm going to, I feel like there's probably some questions if you're willing to take them.
I'm sure, and if I can, I got a bunch of the
Okay.
people in the industry
All right.
behind me that can
That'd
help me
be
along
fine.
here. I
let's-
think they're all signed up to speak, too.
I don't even know. So I think we have maybe a question or two for you.
Okay.
And then I don't want to put you on. I mean, if you have people here to present, that'd be great. Let's see, Representative Jackson.
It's not coming on. Number 2.
Witness 2. Just don't. He's on witness 2.
There we go. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Senator Jeffries, for your presentation. Just a few questions, because, when I look at bills such as this is when energy, growth, policy, as well as environment all collides. And I was just looking at, if you could just help me understand lines 47 through 49. When I think about the coastal zone, and we have a naval base over there, we have a terminal, there's a lot of growth that's happening on our coast.
Mm-hmm.
Will a bill such as this adversely impact Georgia in such a way that it will sort of handcuff our future growth as it relates to energy? Being a retired naval officer, I know we already have pipelines going to the coastline, and if the Navy wanted to expand, or any other company wanted to do business with Georgia as it relates to the coast, are we handcuffing ourselves based on the language I read through 47 through 49?
I don't think so. You still have rail. You still got trucking. I was the one that put this in language in there. It was the floor amendment. I'm talking about the 11 county coast. My concern is being in the water and sewer business that I've been in my whole life. If we had a spill like happened in Alabama down on the coast where it's sandy and the water tables in some places is a couple feet down, we could contaminate the drinking water in that area for years and years to come. And there's a lot of people live down on the coast. That's one of my biggest concerns, and that's the reason I felt to put that in there.
But is that not true with any area? When you start looking at water table, that can happen. It doesn't have to be on the coast.
Well, we already have restrictions on the Floridian aquifer down there already, where we can't. There's certain counties can't not even withdraw any more water because of saltwater intrusion. So, the EPD has recognized it as a very sensitive area already. Those 11 counties. I mean, it's already in statute law.
So that prompts my next question, if I may. So when I look at lines 71 through 74, when the director is making a determination, is this determination based on a study? Because anecdotal information will not cut it.
Criteria for the application, EPD.
So I recommend that, something like that should be spelled out, especially in the days of where the federal government is deregulating. We want to make sure that the 10.1 Georgians that we are responsible for providing quality of life understand that we're doing what we should be doing to preserve quality of life. And then my last question, on line 64, is that 10 business days or just 10 consecutive days?
That's the wrong version. What?
Line 64, where it says within 10 days of applying for a permit. So is that 10 calendar days? Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Teasley, and then I think we'll work our way back over this way. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I've got kind of a similar question or concern there back to lines 47 through 50. Actually, I'll get to that concern in a second. As you lay out there in lines 42 and following, is the EPD currently not in the business of permitting?
They are.
Okay. So why is the language 42 through 47 needed if...
Can somebody give me a copy of the original version? All I have is the committee substitute. What line number?
42 through 47, where it says, on or after July 1st, 2017, any construction of a new petroleum pipeline or extension in the state shall require a permit from the director as provided in this chapter. I would assume that's what the EPD is already doing.
It was. We've only had, what, one application? Okay.
It's only triggered through the eminent domain process in Title 22 currently. There's a EPD permit portion that's currently in Title 22 that once a certificate of public convenience and need from GDOT is issued, that is when that EPD permit process begins. But it has to be issued. So if it's denied, as was the case with Palmetto Pipeline, that process is exempt. If the pipeline company were to go acquire the company with private funds, that process is void.
Okay. And to Representative Jackson's question, I do have concern on lines 47 through 50. Why would we ask the EPD to be permitting and then specifically tell you can't permit that? Isn't that what we're asking them to do, is to make a judgment call on making sure that safety parameters are in place for the water table and so forth, and to specifically prohibit them saying, we want you to be in the business of permitting, except for we're telling you can't permit that.
Right.
Why are we going down that road?
Like I said, my background, I decided I wanted to put that in there, and I'm sure that's why we're going to have a lot more debate on this bill. I just know that area is real sensitive. I do a lot of work down in that area.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. I think Chairman Martin may have the next question.
Number 8 for Chad.
Oh, okay. Who's at 7?
Davis switched around. It's just
Okay.
8.
Okay.
Undo 7.
All right. So Chairman Martin.
Okay, I didn't know if I was number 7. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank
Jerry. On the same thing, I won't belabor it. Well, we can talk about it when we get in subcommittee, but we're talking about eminent domain, and we're doing that. I mean, I guess it seems like 47 through 50 sort of does that the other way. You know, what you're trying to say
Right.
is we, the government, can't tell you got to have a pipeline. But what we just did in 47 through 50 is we're telling people they can't have one if they want one. And so, I mean, we don't, not today, but I
understand.
You know, that's a thing I'm gonna
Right.
I'm gonna try to have to get my hand around, is because it's just the same for the government telling you you have to do something on your property as them telling you you can't do something on your property.
Right.
Seems to be similar to sort of an equal take-in. So.
There was others disagree with me on the other side too.
Well, I mean, well, that's what the process is
That's
about.
right, exactly.
But just to
I
let you
agree.
know, I mean, that's, help me understand that as we get further
Okay,
down the road.
I will.
Appreciate it.
Number 7, sir, and I really appreciate you bringing this, Senator. And I'm all about saving the wildlife, but I will say that these counties, some of these counties are in the areas where they have military bases, and to Representative Jackson's point, we're putting a lot of effort into trying to save our bases. And one of the big issues at BRAC is, does the base have infrastructure? And you're basically saying you can't do infrastructure on these bases. That would be a huge hit on BRAC.
Let's see. I've got lights on and I've left on. I don't even know who has next. Another question?
10.
Representative Raffensperger.
I guess specifically, I would come back to line 46 and 50. And I guess if we prohibited pipelines in that area, then how would people in those areas, what would be their method of getting petroleum products?
The same way they're getting it now, through rail and trucks
Okay. And
and boats coming into bringing it into Savannah.
so in the history of pipeline versus rail, have 47 people been killed with the busting of a pipeline, as 47 people were killed in Quebec when you're transporting oil by rail?
Not that I know of, but as I mentioned earlier, if you was to have a spill like they had in Alabama on the coast from a ruptured pipeline,
But from a life safety
it could make
standpoint,
history.
from a life safety standpoint, has it not been proven over time that pipelines are actually safer than other means of transportation?
Absolutely, and I agree with that.
If we agreed to line 46 and 50, what would be the difference between that and the Keystone XL pipeline, which Republicans have been fighting for, be built for the last 8 years?
I'm just looking at the safety of the water in that area there.
So therefore, if you've been fighting for 8 years for the Keystone XL pipeline to be built, it would not be consistent to be supporting lines 46 to 50 now. Would that be correct?
That'd be correct, and I'll have the right
Thank
to
you.
remove it if you don't like it.
I'm done.
Okay. Representative Williamson, you do have a question. If you will do this, I got to ask you to come to the microphone because these things are webcast or whatever, and you're go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the author of the bill, you'd mentioned twice. I waived the first time, but you again came back to the fact that it's the coastal counties and the water tables there. But I'm no geologist, but is it not true that the fall line extends from Macon to Augusta, and basically you have the coastal plain below that that real geological line, and almost in the entire soils are very similar in that area. It's just sandy, loamy soil, or whatever the geological term is essentially not much difference in the soils, anything from Macon south as there is in these coastal counties that you're describing. So if it is in fact, is it not true if it's going to be a water table problem in those coastal counties, it's a water table problem through all of South Georgia? Is it not true?
I'm not a geologist, and I don't know. I just know EPD has established these 11 counties as a management area because of the drinking water supply.
I can understand the sensitivity of the estuaries. I'm sure some of our friends in the hall will be answering my question, though. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think Representative Gunner, did you have a question?
Thank you, Senator. I just want to make sure that I'm interpreting the bill correctly. Are you saying that if we're using eminent domain as a state, that you have to get a permit, and if you use eminent domain as a private company, you don't have to get a permit? Are you saying that?
No, they still have to have. They would have to get permission from GDOT and then it would go to EPD for permitting, and then once they had both of those certificates, they would be able to use eminent domain.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Senator, I don't see any further questions. I do want to ask you a question about kind of the procedure or how the work of the study commission. I think you actually chaired that, didn't you?
Yes.
And the study commission was to come back with recommendations for this session.
That's right.
I do recall that last year, of course, the legislation last year came through this committee, and I do recall that during that time, the trucking company or the gas delivery trucking company, tanking, whatever you want to call it, Colonial Oil was very involved in advocating for the legislation last year. During the study commission process, were they involved in that process at all?
They were. We heard from a lot of people, and the biggest thing we heard, the people that come and spoke, was eminent domain and the protection of the coastal area down there. That was the majority of the people that we heard testimony from in these meetings.
Okay. Any further questions for the author of the bill from the committee? I don't see
Thank you,
any.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman. Appreciate
Thank
it.
y'all, committee.
I know you put a lot of hard work into this. Did you have a? Yeah, yeah. All right. We do have some people that wanted to speak. Rusty Sewell, I saw you out there. Huh?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Rusty Sewell, and I represent Colonial Pipeline. Colonial Pipeline is the main pipeline company that goes from Louisiana up to the New York Harbor. That along also, there's Plantation Pipeline that goes up, I think, toward Virginia. But Colonial Pipeline is our home office is up in Alpharetta, and we run a pipeline. When you said want to speak, I'm not sure whether I agreed with the want part after, but I did want to get up here, and I want to thank the study committee. We did, after it came through this committee and set up the study committee, we met with them. We actually had some of our people testify before, explaining what went on. I also want to thank.
Could I just interrupt for a second?
Yes, sir.
Would you explain if there is a difference between Colonial Pipeline and Colonial Oil?
Yes, and I think Russ is coming after me, and he can explain. As most of you know or are involved in the business, first you have, of course, the derricks and the Gulf and Texas and others. Then you have the pipeline. The pipeline, we are really a transportation company. If you want to know, even by the state of Georgia, we're taxed like Greyhound bus, because we carry the goods that we carry, the petroleum, the heating oil, the aviation fuel. We bring probably 90% of the aviation fuel that comes up, particularly for Hartsville. We bring those. They're owned by other parties. I mean, big oil companies, others. We bring those up. Once we bring them up here, they're distributed to basically a distributor. We used to call them jobbers, and they're all over. Colonial Oil, which is down on the coast, which receives pretty much all of their by ship that comes in, because they're right on the coast and they come up there. They're really kind of a jobber or a distributor. They have other things they're involved in, but mainly in the petroleum area. The jobber or distributor's job is to get it out to the filling station, to get it to the airport, whatever it has to go. So the difference, it is kind of confusing when you say Colonial and Colonial. We're totally separate companies. We have no identity together. But Colonial Pipeline is the pipeline. Colonial Oil is down in Savannah, is the distributor. And I'm not sure that we even, because we're a pipeline and they get most of theirs by barge, Russ might know about it, that we even connect other than maybe some gas going down there. But anyway, that's kind of the operation. I want to thank Chairman Jeffries for the bill. He's been working with us. You know, our interest in this is, yes, if we, you know, maintenance and expansion, particularly maintenance, is extremely important to us. The access to be able to get to our lines, as y'all saw with what happened in Alabama, and the Alabama officials were very good about letting us get in and fix our lines. Someday we might well need to expand our lines, or in hopefully kind of in the existing track. And I think the chairman and the study committee looked at that and saw some things. It might not be petroleum, but it might be aviation fuel, you know, that it needs expansion for. But either way, I think this bill addresses that. It involves it in that. I know if you ask me the question of whether we are in support of, that some of you might, of any restrictions, I mean, sure, my company would like nothing better than to have to not have to go through different steps before we use the right of eminent domain. But I think those are policy issues that y'all have to make, and it's right for y'all to make. There are a lot of different, I'm the company, I want the oil to come up, I want as much freedom as to bring it up through the pipeline as possible, but there are also other interests that y'all have to weigh one way or the other, and we're happy to work with y'all any way we can to come to an answer on those. And I think the chairman has done a very good job of kind of settling some of those so far.
Well, let me ask you this, so I understand it better. So Colonial Oil, which actually trucks, or they're a jobber that trucks,
Yes.
they truck gasoline, right? Gasoline out to the.
I'm sure when it comes in, and I'll let Russ explain a little bit better since he represents them.
Yeah.
Colonial Oil, they receive their gasoline, all of it by barge, I would expect, and then they will do just like y'all all have jobbers in your area,
Right.
distributors. They're the same way. They then will truck that gasoline out to the filling station, you know, the quick marks, things like that. Also, I'm sure they may have some aviation fuel too that has to go to the airports in that area.
What do they? What I don't understand, do they get any of the fuel from Colonial Pipeline? I mean, is there any connection there? Any
Mr. Chairman,
connectivity?
as I said, I'm not sure that they do. We might in certain cases, you know, if there's a problem down there and barges can't get in,
Yeah.
I'm sure they ask us to truck some of the
Yeah.
jobbers, or they might come up and get some of the
Okay.
gasoline off the pipeline up here at some of our distribution areas.
I'm just trying to
But
figure out what.
they really don't,
Yeah.
because our pipeline is going. The main pipeline as it was constructed, and somebody asked, well, why was it that way? Well, it was that way because it was the best route that, like when ours was built back in the 60s, from getting to the harbor, you know, from the coast or Louisiana to the harbor. And so they didn't really, it wasn't so much that it came through here because it was
Yeah.
supposed to,
Well,
but it did.
Well, what I'm trying to figure out, I'm trying to
Yes, sir.
trying to say this respectfully and not, but so would Colonial Pipeline's interest in this bill passing, as it's been presented, would it be that without that there would be competition by new pipelines? I mean, I'm trying to understand how Colonial
No,
Pipeline would even have an issue in this thing at all.
Where our issue is in this is that when y'all, I mean, before this came up, I'll answer that. Before it came up last year, we were not out here advocating legislation on pipeline.
Right.
I mean, we did 10 years ago, and I will be truthful about that. In this same room, we met with Judiciary 10 years ago, because at that time we were looking at expanding the pipeline. We didn't at that time. It was, and we looked at legislation because truthfully, the legislation on the books now is very hard to deal with, particularly when you have maintenance issues and things like that. This legislation, I think, is better written than the existing law. But to answer your question, no, we were not advocating. But if y'all are going to work in this area, we wanted to be involved. We wanted to be involved with the study committee because we also want the right of if we needed to condemn property. I mean, that is a necessary thing when you're expanding or putting a new pipeline in. We're not advocating that. But our interest is when y'all get into this area, we wanted to be part of it and listening to what went on.
Thank you. I don't see any. Anybody have a question from the committee? Representative Jackson, I think you do. Okay.
Rusty, thank you for your presentation.
Yes, sir.
And a couple of things came to mind during your presentation. First off, my constituents didn't know anything about Colonial Pipeline until that situation happened in Alabama. Now they know a lot about Colonial.
Correct.
But during your presentation, the only word that came to mind was contingency. And I just think this bill, especially going back to the previous lines, 47 to 49, we need to have contingency to be able to bring in petroleum by way of ships. And that means we have to have that ability on the coastline. And I just would love to get your perspective. If we pass a bill such as this, how would that not impact Colonial Pipeline, Colonial Oil, or just Georgia just in general?
Truthfully, I'm not sure. I mean, when you say bringing it, we have the ability of ships coming in now.
Correct, but I'm also thinking about growth, expansion, right?
Growth, expansion, I don't know. I mean, we don't know what the world holds for us, and it's hard to legislate today for what might happen 15 years from now. We might have derricks sitting off the coast somewhere, and that changes everything, and that future General Assembly will have to address that. I mean, I think all you can do right now is try to address what might foreseeably happen. And foreseeably happening, yes, we could, I mean, even Colonial Pipeline could be extending a new pipeline or extension from our pipeline. I think there's probably a bigger market for that, maybe in aviation fuel if we needed to do that. I hate to bring Delta in, but if all of a sudden we had a new airport somewhere, we would probably have to put a pipeline there. Those kind of things, and I think we address that in this legislation. How far ahead we can look at, I don't know.
Well, I guess my put my military hat on just to cut through the chase. We are predicting a lot. We are waging a lot for that coastline. I mean, we're talking about that is going to be our global connector, right? We're investing millions and millions of dollars on that coastline right now. So it's hard for me not to look forward and see what we do today and how will that impact the future. I mean, we're doing things today to prepare for a Super Bowl in 2019, right? So if the ports and everything that we're doing, investing today, preparing today on that coastline, that's the reason why we have Porsche and Mercedes-Benz. They were looking at that port. They were looking at the ability to bring things, their goods and services to and from. And so when I look at this bill, again, as I said to Senator Jeffries, I just think we're handcuffing ourselves in such a way without connecting all the dots. And one dot is that coastline. We will not adversely do anything to impact the world's busiest airport. Well, the world's busiest airport needs jet fuel, right? I mean, I used to have to deal with jet fuel all the time when I was on an aircraft carrier. And that was one of our strategic elements in every decision that we had to report back to Washington, D.C. Can we get jet fuel for those 120 planes? So I'm just, you're the expert. You're in this business. And I just would like for you just to give us, the committee, a little bit understanding of, because if I was in your shoes, I think this would hurt me. If I was in Colonial Pipeline, I was like, no, I don't want this bill, because this limits my opportunity. And I'm not trying to put words into your mouth, but I'm just.
I think if you ask me, as I said before, if I'm Colonial Pipeline, and I want a bill, my bill I wouldn't have to go to DOT or EPD or anywhere. I could go right to doing eminent domain. But that's not my decision. That's what y'all have to make. And I will say, yes, I mean, we're part of what we're trying to do here, and part of what we think the bill allows us to do, is if we do get in that situation where we need to get more fuel in here to Atlanta Hartsfield Airport, which is a valuable thing, this allows us to do it. It gives us a better roadmap than maybe what we have now. And it allows us to do that. Or if there's, as I said, if there's a movement to do a second airport somewhere around, it allows us to be able to handle it. Now, again, the coast is extremely important. The port you see the growth years ago, way before we were around. I was in the governor's office here in the 80s, and the port was important. It's 10 times more important now.
Mm-hmm.
And that area is more important now. So I think it is right for y'all, and it may be, the thought is we need to look at it and make sure that coastal area is protected also. And I think what the senator was saying was he's trying to make sure there's not any problems down there, because he doesn't want ships or trade to come in there, or trade going out of there, which is just as important as it coming in, to have some disruption because of whatever a pipeline does down there. I don't know whether that's legitimate or not. I think, as he said, people differ on that, and I think that's y'all's job to really look at. But if I had to say, I don't think it necessarily hurts Colonial Pipeline. If I thought it did, I'd be up here testifying.
Okay.
Another way.
Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you.
Representative Jackson, good questions. Appreciate that. So that is you. That's all the questions we have for you, sir. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Recognize Russ Pennington from Colonial Oil.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman Parsons.
Uh-huh.
So if I can start, I'll try to piggyback more on the clarification between Colonial Oil and Colonial Pipeline. So Colonial Oil is a diverse petroleum provider. So it is gas as if you put in your cars, jet fuel, lubricants and whatnot. They have 6 terminals on pipelines throughout the state, as well as the ocean terminal at the port that is adjacent and with the state's strategic oil reserves. Colonial Oil was a participant on the Petroleum Commission, as I think you were asking earlier, and has tried to participate in that throughout. I've worked actively throughout the origin and through this whole process with this piece of proposed legislation, and like to think that it's working on some good compromise from both sides as we go through this. I think there was a lot of desire to actually eliminate eminent domain entirely for petroleum pipelines, originating back to last year's legislative session, which clearly was a contentious discussion. And as we worked through a lot of those issues, I think as Rusty pointed out, the realization of where the state is and the unknowns makes that to maybe it's not entirely possible. I mean, the likelihood of a second Atlanta airport is real, and the diversification of our state's energy supplies, I think, is also something to consider. And as we've seen both in our neighboring states, South Carolina with a spill, and in Alabama with a fracture and explosion, and the disruption to oil supplies, I think recognizing the age of the infrastructure in all pipelines, including petroleum pipelines, it's necessary to give the pipeline companies some room where they can address their aging infrastructure and not be able to take out houses and neighborhoods that have gone up in some cases around that and be able to reroute. That's kind of the thought process behind all the different definitions, and it really, I think it adds benefits to the existing pipelines in both the maintenance and expansion definition, and then clarifies a lot of holes with both the extension and the new pipelines. If I could address Representative Jackson's question a little bit further on military bases, because that was part of the consideration. With Kings Bay, the thought was those are nuclear-powered submarines, and probably the need to provide petroleum for the submarines is not a real issue. And with Fort Stewart, the western boundary of Fort Stewart extends outside the coastal management zone, so there is access to get petroleum pipelines into that. Thinking national defense was a real concern. And further, I'd just like to add, in the coastal management zone, and particularly the Savannah and Glenn counties, I think Chairman Jeffries hits a real good point with saltwater intrusion and the sensitivity to that area. Glenn county's had corporate wells, corporate-owned wells. So, I mean, Georgia Pacific has lost a well to saltwater intrusion. King and Prince Seafood has lost a well to saltwater intrusion, and there's no more water supply for those customers. The 4 counties surrounding Metro Savannah have had their water use, it will be cut back over time. I think that's just an extra consideration to compound with the fact there are no petroleum pipelines that currently exist in the state of Georgia. And it's not just a Georgia condition. That same condition exists in northern Florida around Jacksonville, in South Carolina and North Carolina. And the distribution for petroleum in that area is just trucked. And take your hat off of ownership of any of these companies. The construction cost in that low-lying area with water tables, marsh, swamps, it's a diverse area. It'd be extraordinary. And I think that all goes back to environmental sensitivity and part of the consideration.
So, in addition to moving gasoline with jobbers that are part of Colonial Oil is also an environmental organization. Is that correct, based on your testimony?
I think Colonial Oil and its owners, it's a family-owned company. It's right at 100 years old. I think they have a very near and dear piece of their heart to environment and just doing what's right for the community. Okay. And I think their company reflects that.
I think we have a question.
I did.
Okay.
I look forward. I'm sure we'll hear from you in subcommittee, but I'm unclear. You said that part of the base was outside the 11 county area,
right?
So they could connect. So they could otherwise connect to a pipeline. So it's okay if the pipeline gets to the base outside, but then runs in that soil inside that county. I mean, I'm just trying to find the difference. Either it's okay to be in that soil in the 11 county area, or it's not. It's not okay on a military base, and I'm poking a little fun at you, but it's either it's okay for it to be there or it's not.
It's fair.
And then the second thing, and I understand about the water table. I don't live down there or whatever, but I'm unclear as to how much water a pipeline uses.
Well, I think it was the fear of a fracture, as we've seen in neighboring states, and what that would do to the water supply.
You talked about saltwater intrusion. I mean, that's because we've built houses and people live there in their army base, and they're pulling water out of the water table, fresh water, and the intrusion. I understand that the water supply and so forth, but I just so when we get to the subcommittee, I want to talk about facts relative to the bill, not things that we don't do. Just so when we get to there, I think that would be we'd all be well advised to focus on those.
Okay. Any other questions from members of the committee? I did, if I may, before you step down. And I'm trying to be as impartial as I can with this, because what Chairman Jeffries brings, what he's working on, I know is he's wanting to do. He's wanting to help the people down in that area, and has environmental concerns about water, and so on and so forth. But I have been involved in this legislation now. This is the second year, so over a year. And here again, we've heard from environmentalists. We've heard from people that own property there in Effingham County, different people, even before the study commission was formed. And here again, and I don't mean to be disrespectful to you or Colonial, but your all's involvement or Colonial Oil's involvement in this, to me, is the it's the entity that, to me, only comes from a fear of competition. It only fears from protecting your own interest. I mean, I say that as respectfully as I can, but I can't help. I don't see Colonial Oil as being, involved from a environmental standpoint or protecting the residents of Effingham County or anything like that. I mean, but y'all have never. I have no reason really to think anything other than that. And that's nothing against the proponents of the bill, the senator and people from Effingham County, and even some of the environmentalists. I mean, those are all, they have valid concerns. I understand that, but the concerns of Colonial Oil though just seem so self-serving to me, and I say that. I know it doesn't sound very respectful, but I say it with the utmost respect because I understand. I respect the company. I don't really know the company, but I respect it as a business entity and a successful, apparently a very successful business entity. But as far as opposing pipelines and wanting to make it more stringent controls over actually getting permits and things of that nature and being able to do business and expand economic development and all the things that go with that, I just have a hard time with Colonial Oil's involvement in this, and that's just pretty much the way I feel about it. Any questions or any other comments from the committee? Thank you, sir. All right. Robert Ramsey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Robert Ramsey. I'm president of the Georgia Conservancy. The Georgia Conservancy has now operated in the state for 50 years, and we've worked with this body on a number of issues, including the designation of the coastal management zone, which I'll talk briefly about. As a matter of transparency, I also want to indicate or let you all know that it was an honor and a privilege to have been appointed to the Petroleum Pipeline Study Commission by Governor Deal. And I got to tell you, I learned an awful lot. I came into this with an interest in primarily focusing on the conservation of a number of very important rivers that all happen to empty into the coast of Georgia. For 50 years, I'll say that the Georgia Conservancy, at least in my opinion, has been one of the most pragmatic conservation organizations. We care a lot about quality of life in the state of Georgia. We're not what I would consider to be environmentalists, but rather conservationists. A couple of quick examples that I'll give you that demonstrate that is that we're the only conservation organization that did not oppose the expansion of the port. We recognized very early on that 1 in 12 jobs in the state are impacted by that port, and working with the Port Authority to find ways to mitigate those impacts was rather the tack that we took, and we're very proud of that work with the port. The second thing that I'd like to point out as a means to demonstrate the Georgia Conservancy's pragmatic approach is that we're the only conservation organization in this state that filed an amicus brief, a friendly brief to the Supreme Court in the recent water war between Georgia and Florida. So that's just a little background. As a member of the Petroleum Pipeline Commission, there were really 3 issues that we heard time and time again. Rusty and Russ both indicated that the use of eminent domain by a private construction company was really called into question by a large number of landowners, forest landowners, agricultural landowners, just landowners. And the question comes up time and again, who actually owns the land? They all recognize the difference between DOT condemning land or a utility needing to run a power line or a utility gas line. But this issue really came up time and again, and I agree that the political will is likely not there. I am very grateful for the thoughtfulness of the approach on this issue because it is incredibly complex. And as a member of that commission, I learned a fair amount. When you think about pipelines, they are linear. So when you have a pipeline that runs from Houston or thereabouts through the state of Georgia, and you have impacts on the western side of our state or in Alabama like we've seen happen, what happens is you lose much of your fuel supply that is coming into the state of Georgia. But for the port, on many instances, in 2 recent instances, Georgia's fuel supply would have been even more greatly impacted than it was as a result of those pipeline disruptions that occurred in Colonial. You had petroleum products being shipped during that time from the port in Savannah as far north as Chattanooga, Tennessee. When you contemplate a pipeline along the Georgia coast, certainly there are a huge number of environmental impacts that we should concern ourselves with. The coastal management zone was designated by the legislator in 1997 as an area to be focused on and treated specially as it relates to the balance between economic activity, military activity. We've also got a pretty active bombing range down on the coast, the only one that is left on the eastern seaboard. And then environmental concerns, because much of the economy of the coast is driven by that environment, the marshes, the seafood industry, recreational fishing, so on and so forth. So if you pick up on this linear line, when you have disruptions, you do impact the rest of the state. If a pipeline with enough capacity were developed along the coast of Georgia, you have a real chance of driving some of those other operators out of business. You have something called the Jones Act at the federal level, which really causes petroleum products that come in via ship to not really be able to compete in a free market with piped products. And so you can see that market forces, because Colonial Oil is a Georgia company and they're pretty smart folks and they're not going to stay in a business where they're not making money, maybe to your point, you have the opportunity to lose that fuel delivery diversification. So it is an incredibly complex issue. My pleasure. This is an incredibly complex and deep issue, and it's not quite as simple as I think a lot of us want to make it. I do believe that Senator Jeffrey's bill addresses a large number of the recommendations that the Petroleum Pipeline Commission issued to this body. And it goes a long way in working with the industry broadly, EPD, and the Department of Transportation to address the concerns that they also raised during this process. So I appreciate, again, the thoughtfulness of this, but you actually could be creating more of a limiting factor through market forces in a pipeline with great capacity flowing through the coast of Georgia and disrupting those diverse delivery systems. So I appreciate Chairman Parsons' the opportunity to speak, and certainly can look forward to working on this issue as we move forward.
Okay, and thank you. I think we do have a question. If you could you hold just for a second? I believe did you have a question?
Yeah, I just want to make sure the Jones Act is that.
It's a federal act that requires certain amounts of insurance for marine vessels carrying petroleum in particular.
Marine vessels carrying any product.
Sure.
Okay, so this is regular cost of importation, is it not? It's not for petroleum only; it's for all products.
It's in the case of petroleum products, it is a different cost that delivery system has to bear that pipelines don't.
I understand, but I mean they're all
delivery
methodologies have a. I just wanted to be clear that it's not a tariff of any kind.
It's not a tariff, and it's not focused exclusively on the petroleum.
No, I just wanted to make sure because I knew the Jones Act as an insurance thing for seamen. I wanted to make sure I wasn't missing that there was another one. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Ramsey. Appreciate it. That's all the questions. We have, and actually we moved along pretty well. It's what we have about 10 after 4. We started just a little over an hour ago. And we have one more speaker who have signed up, Stephanie Kindergan. Stephanie.
Good afternoon, Chairman Parsons and members of the committee. My name is Stephanie Kendrigan, and I am the Director of Public Affairs for Kinder Morgan. We are one of the largest energy infrastructure companies in the United States. We have around 84,000 miles of pipelines that we operate. We have about 155 terminals that we operate. Here in Georgia alone, we have over 3,000 miles of pipeline, and our plantation system, which is headquartered in Alpharetta, delivers petroleum products every single day to Macon, Columbus, Athens, and Atlanta. And then we also have an incredible natural gas system. It's a southern natural gas system that delivers natural gas to all 4 corners of the state. We're also continuing to expand in the state of Georgia. We've got about $2.5 billion we're going to be investing in the state of Georgia in the next 2 years. A major portion of that is down at the Elba liquefaction facility that we're constructing in Chatham County. That's about a $2 billion project. We have some serious concerns with Senate Bill 191, and I look forward to working with Chairman Martin as we work through some of those, and we have language that we would like to suggest for other parts of this bill. But I want to go back to, I think, that what the main focus of this committee meeting today has been, and that's back on lines 47 through 50. And what you're seeing here is an attempt to ban petroleum pipelines in one part of the state. And I think this is incredibly bad policy for a multitude of reasons. First, this suggests that the natural resources in one part of the state are somehow more valuable than the natural resources in another part of the state. And it also suggests that you can't safely construct, operate, and design a pipeline to operate in those areas. And that is absolutely false. We actually have a pipeline right now that runs underneath the San Francisco Bay in California, the San Francisco Bay, and it delivers jet fuel to San Francisco Airport every single day. So this notion that you can't have a pipeline that is in an environmentally sensitive area is just absolutely false. And I would argue that we haven't really seen this in any other states at all. I would also argue that it should be the option of EPD on whether it grants a permit to these facilities. If we propose a route that is environmentally unsafe, then EPD should be in the business of denying that permit, but it shouldn't be the legislature that is making that decision. I would also argue that a permanent ban in that region is absolutely short-sighted. We don't know what kind of growth is going to occur in that area of the state with the ports. I think Representative Jackson and Representative Belton did a great job of talking about the importance of our military facilities down there. And I do want to point out, this is actually from the BRAC Commission report in 2005. One of the things that they considered was the ability of the infrastructure of both the existing and the potential receiving communities to support forces, missions, and personnel. One of the things that the gentleman with Colonial talked about as well, it doesn't impact any of your current things. Well, we don't know what we can potentially get down on the coast, and we don't want to impact that into the future. And then the other thing I would say is that there's little to no justification for banning petroleum pipelines down in that part of the state from a safety perspective. One, we already have pipelines down there. We have a major natural gas system that runs in 9 of these 11 counties. So we're already down there, my company alone. And then you're already bringing in petroleum products down there by a less safe means of transportation. So those tankers that they're bringing in are 14 times more likely to have a spill than a pipeline. Those trucks are 36 times more likely to have a spill than a pipeline, and those are US DOT statistics. And so finally, what I would just urge the committee is to think long and hard about this, because I think that once you start a precedent in state law where you are banning infrastructure in one part of the state, that becomes a very slippery slope. Because what are we going to ban in the North Georgia mountains? What are we going to ban, along the Savannah River, that sort of thing? And so I think that we just have to be very cautious as we're going down this road. And so I'll close with that. I'm happy to answer any questions, but I am looking forward to working with Chairman Martin on improving this legislation.
Okay. Any questions from members of the committee? I think we do have one, if you care to take it. Have a couple.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Stephanie, I appreciate your presentation. And when you said 84,000 miles, can you share with us the last time any of that 84,000 miles of pipeline had any serious issues that threaten our environment, our citizens? I know it's only 3,000 in Georgia, but
right. So keep in mind, I have the entire southeastern U.S.
Right.
So I am not familiar with incidents that occur really outside of my area. When you're talking about, are you talking about a loss of life, or are you talking about
just in general? Because you're right. I mean, we've heard. It's almost like a warning call, right? If we took heed to some of the warning calls that I heard this afternoon, we would never build nuclear power plants.
Right.
We would never build an airplane, right? There's always going to be some risk involved, and if my grandmother was still alive, she would be 104. She'll think my automobile is a hazard to my health. But I know we have controls. Right? We build them more efficient, more effective. We inform the public what we're doing and why we're doing it. And so it would be great if you could bring this committee, some of the things that, since your company covers 84,000 miles
Right.
of pipeline.
So some of the stuff that we do along that same line is we actually have real-time data on our website that we post all of the time, and so it's continuous on any incidents that we have on our system. So that I can certainly share that data with the committee or with the subcommittee as appropriate.
That'd be perfect. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Somebody else had a question, I thought. Chairman Dollar, which mic are you at there? Okay, I'll let the professional.
That'll work. Good. Thank you, Stephanie. If I'm following correctly, this bill is the results of the commission that took place over the summer, correct?
Correct.
What was Kinder Morgan's input into this? Because it seems like y'all have issues with certain parts of it. What was the role that y'all played in that commission? I mean, what did y'all contribute, or what did y'all, take out? What did you contribute, or what did you, take out, I guess?
So I actually did not have an opportunity to participate in the commission because I was out of the office for maternity leave. So I was out of the office all last fall when the committee was meeting. However, prior to the commission meeting, I did sit down with Chairman Jeffries. I was very pregnant. And walked him through a multitude of concerns that we had. And I also did, I went and met with almost every single member of the commission itself and talked to them about some of the things that we would like to see come out of the meeting. And that was my participation prior to me going on maternity leave. But at the same time, we did have our consultants were at every single meeting.
Okay, that was just I'm just wondering why we're here now talking about this and not at that meeting, but thank you.
All right. Thank you, Chairman Dahl. Let me add just one question as far as regards to his question. But aside from being where you were pregnant and couldn't, what did Kinder Morgan or anybody with Kinder Morgan, were they part of that commission? Were they assigned?
We were not an appointed commission member, no, sir.
Okay, that's the question. Any other questions? Thank you. Thank you. Chairman Jeffries, did you have any concluding remarks? So what we're doing, or what I'm doing, is this bill is now assigned to Chairman Martin's Energy Subcommittee, and so he'll be working with you, and you'll work with him and see. I mean, there's still a lot of time, literally, as far as legislative days are concerned. So a lot can be done, I mean, there were a lot of good questions. It would appear that maybe some change got to come. So change gonna come. So if you would work with Chairman Martin and members of his committee, Chairman Martin, did you have anything you want to say?
No, sir. Just other than that,
I'll get with the senator and make sure that we get on the schedule that works for his, and that we'll let all the interested parties know through your office, sir.
All right. Thank you. And Chairman Jeffries, I do appreciate you spending the time here this afternoon with us. I know you've worked hard on this, and it's an issue. These water issues especially are things that are important to you. Appreciate you coming with the bill. Thank you. And with that, unless there's objection, the meeting is adjourned.